And now we will proceed to today's business. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to insert written remarks into the record on any of today's measures or amendments. Pursuant to the procedure we emailed your offices about yesterday, we will consider the Syria bill first, followed by an en bloc consideration of the remaining measures. I now call up the bill H.R. 2106, the Syria Freedom Support Act. Without objection, the amendment in the nature of the substitute that was sent to your offices on Monday and that all members have in front of them will be considered base text for purposes of markup, is considered read, and is open for amendment at any point. Also, as your offices were notified last night, in order to save everyone from having to hear double statements from me, I will call up the bipartisan manager's amendment before we proceed to the opening statement. So without objection, Amendment 110, offered by the Chair, which members have before them, is made the pending business of the committee and is considered read. Before turning to the ranking member and any other members seeking recognition on the Syria measure, I recognize myself to speak. Today, the committee is marking up legislation to address the threat posed by the Syrian regime to our nation, to our interests, and to our allies. It is fitting that we should be marking up this legislation at this time, as this week marks the one-year anniversary of the beginning of the current protest against the Syrian regime. And for those who thought of and referred to Assad as some kind of reformer, and that any engagement will ultimately bear fruit, the facts have proven them wrong. The regime that some rush to engage has been doing the following. They've been on the State Department State Sponsor of Terrorism list since 1979, well earned, maintained a strategic partnership with the Iranian regime as well as with Hamas and Hezbollah, aided and abetted the entry of foreign fighters into Iraq who killed our young men and women serving in uniform there, repeatedly retains extensive chemical weapons and ballistic missile capabilities, and pursued a secret nuclear program reportedly with North Korea's assistance. And now the regime is waging war against the Syrian people, who are being killed on a daily basis as they exercise their fundamental freedoms. Assad's regime is digging in for a long-term war, and news reports indicate that the regime is bragging about mass cleansing. The bloody assault on the city of Homs and other areas in the country clearly show the regime will not release a stranglehold on the Syrian people. Congress must once again lead the effort to clarify U.S. policy and provide all with the necessary tools and guidance to address the situation in Syria, the threats posed by the Assad regime to the United States, our interests, and our allies. To that end, we are marking up H.R. 2106, the bipartisan Syrian Freedom Support Act. This bill strengthens sanctions against the Syrian regime, enhances multilateral commitment to address the Syrian regime's threatening policy, and establishes a program to support a transition to a democratically elected government in Syria. H.R. 2106 states that it is the objective of U.S. policy to deny the Syrian regime the ability to carry out, and ultimately we hope to abandon, its support for foreign terrorist organization, its development of dangerous weapons programs, its intervention in the affairs of the Lebanese government, and the oppression of its own people in Syria. H.R. 2106 also strengthens existing U.S. laws targeting the Syrian regime's weapons programs and imposes extensive sanctions on Iran's energy sector. The bill also authorizes financial and political assistance to entities that support a peaceful, democratic transition in Syria and requires the Secretary of State to submit a strategy to support a transition to a democratic government in Syria. Finally, H.R. 2106 also seeks to address the Syrian regime's gross human rights abuses by imposing sanctions against senior regime officials responsible for such abuses. I would conclude by noting that Congress last enacted Syria sanctions in 2003 when we adopted the Syria Accountability and Lebanese Sovereignty Restoration Act, co-authored by me and my friend and colleague from New York, Mr. Engel. In the almost 9 years since, the threat posed by the Syrian regime against the U.S., our allies, and the Syrian people has grown steadily, but U.S. efforts to address this threat has not risen proportionally. So I am pleased that Mr. Engel and I have been able to team up again to sponsor legislation that we have worked with our ranking member, my good friend from California, Mr. Berman, to include additional financial sanctions, a visa ban on persons who provide the Syrian regime with military equipment, a mechanism for the disposal of Syrian chemical, biological, and nuclear materials once a post-Assad transition government is in place. I appreciate the ranking member's co-sponsorship, his strong support for the bill, and with that, I'm pleased to recognize my friend from California, Mr. Berman, for his remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and I want to thank you for